Hi, welcome back to Karen's Beach Reads. I'm Karen and I'm coming to you from Port St. Lucie, Florida. Today we're going to be talking about Philip Pullman's new book, Belle Sauvage, along with his Dark Materials trilogy, which includes The Golden Compass, The Subtle Knife, and The Amber Spyglass. If you've watched my channel before, you'll know that when I talk about a book, I'll tell you what it was about, 3 things I liked about it, 3 things I didn't like about it, who I would recommend it for, and whether or not you should take it with you on your next vacation to read. Last week we talked about romance novels, but this week we're going to be talking about a teen to young adult book series, and I would argue that probably some adults would enjoy this too. I first discovered his Dark Materials trilogy when I was in middle school. I was probably about 12 or 13 years old, and I picked this up out of my middle school library, and I fell in love with this book that depicted this fantastical world full of specters and armored bears and children who were very small but could make a difference in the world that they lived in. The first book, The Golden Compass, follows Lyra Balakwa, who is a girl who lives kind of a carefree life at Jordan College. Her life there kind of comes to an end when her uncle, who she thinks is her uncle, comes to visit and brings with him different scientific findings about a substance called dust and talks about his expeditions up north. He leaves and Lyra is taken up by a woman named Mrs. Coulter, who's just this very beautiful, graceful, classy woman who is also a horrible deceiver. Lyra lives with Mrs. Coulter for a little bit and they make all the preparations of wanting to go up north, but they never do. Lyra escapes Mrs. Coulter and flees north with an alethiometer, which is a device that can tell the truth and give you the answer to the questions you might have about life, the universe, and everything. After I read The Golden Compass, I was absolutely enthralled by it. The world that Philip Pullman builds in that first book is just awe-inspiring. And the way he describes different emotions and his understanding of the way children think is just amazing. And I love the writing so much that I picked up the second book called The Subtle Knife, which brings in another character named Will. He kind of meets Lyra in another world. Between the two of them, they discover another tool called the Subtle Knife, which has the ability to cut holes in the fabric of space. They travel into different worlds together and discover specters which feed on the souls of adults. They discover a conflict that's going on in the cosmos between different angels, and it just turns into this whole sprawling, vast universe that is just, it was difficult to keep a hold on when in the mind of like a 12 or 13 year old. But it was interesting just the same. I really fell in love with that world and read the final book, The Amber Spyglass, which is just even more just like sprawling and convoluted. And revisiting these books was amazing. I had forgotten so much about that world, and I think when I read it through when I was younger, I was more focused on what Lyra and Will were doing, that I never realized just how multi-dimensional Philip Pullman's secondary characters are in the books. So I was just really interested in that as well. Now, The Golden Compass was made into a movie, I think back in 2007, perhaps. It was quite a while ago, and it had Nicole Kidman as Mrs. Coulter, which was a good decision, I thought. However, the movie faced kind of a backlash from religious groups that thought that the material criticized the church. The book itself criticizes religion quite a bit. I don't think that on a cursory reading you really get an understanding of like what it means. Like, you kind of have to like read a little deeper into it, and I feel like if you just are reading for the plot and that you're setting yourself up to, if you're a religious person, to be offended by the religious content in the books. The religious entity. It's called the Magisterium, and it has different branches, like the General Oblation Board, and there's like in La Belle Sauvage, they talk about like all the different branches of the Magisterium. I think it's kind of a hyperbolic look at religion and the way religion discourages deeper thought about things and kind of leans more on faith to explain the ways of the universe than actually discovering a scientific purpose for things. And I think that was the main criticism of religion in the book, but I don't think that it meant to be wildly offensive. I think that what Philip Pullman was going for was more, again, like a hyperbolic look at the way religion discourages free thought, which it was an interesting argument to make, but I don't think it's really anything to be offended over. It's a children's book series. So I was really excited to learn that La Belle Sauvage was coming out, and that it was going to be, Philip Pullman kind of described it as, he doesn't like the word prequel, but that's kind of what this book was it was a look at the world before Lyra, and before Lyra kind of gained agency and went running around Jordan College with her friends. So it follows a boy named Malcolm and a dishwasher in his parents' pub. Her name was Alice. So Malcolm and Alice are not friends, and they actually pretty strongly dislike each other. So Malcolm and Alice take it upon themselves to transport Lyra to Jordan College after a flood rips through their town and knocks down the place she's staying, which is like with a bunch of nuns. Malcolm realizes very early that Lyra is in danger because there's this guy named Gerard Bonneville, and he is the most terrifying villain that I've ever read about in a book, probably ever. On Malcolm and Alice's adventure, they face the normal things that, you know, a 16-year-old and a 12-year-old would face when they are traveling down a swollen river in a tiny canoe with a 6-month-old baby in tow. You know, it's pretty terrifying. Their adventure is very harrowing. They run into like different adults that would do them harm. They also, the story kind of devolves into this fantastical, I caught hints of the Odyssey in it almost. They arrive on an island, and there's a fairy that wants to keep Lyra as her own child and then refuses to give her back, so they kind of have to trick her into giving Lyra back, and then they head back down the river. It talks about you know, how they grow fond of each other, Alice and Malcolm and Lyra, the things that are at stake and what they can stand to lose along the way in this adventure. I really love this story. I love the adventure, and I loved what the children kind of learned along the way. The universe that this book was set in was just as deep and wonderful as his Dark Materials trilogy. I think Philip Pullman made this book a good deal darker than his Dark Materials trilogy. The villain, you know, I mentioned Gerard Bonneville, was absolutely terrifying. In Lyra's world, these people have their souls living on the outside of their body as animals. Malcolm's demon's name is Asta, and Alice's demon's name is Ben. And Lyra has Pantalaimon, who you would probably recognize if you read The Golden Compass before. And they're young enough that their demons shift shape as they go on this journey. Asta would be like a rat in one part of the journey, and then swiftly change to a dog, and they shift shape. And as they grow up and as they reach puberty, the demons will settle into one form that kind of represents like who those people are. Gerard Bonneville's demon is a hyena, so you kind of see this like scavenger type animal that laughs and has this cackle that is just terrifying, and just really made my blood run cold every time he was written about. And along the way, this hyena demon continues to lose his limbs because of various things that happen, and by the end he's just kind of flopping there, and it's really kind of a sinister, chilling effect, and it's quite terrifying. So this book is really, I enjoyed it for it being kind of more of a horror story. I thought it was kind of a good book for Halloween. So the one thing I wasn't really a fan of this book was the ending. I didn't like how it kind of left me hanging a little more than The Golden Compass did. The first book of a trilogy, I feel, is a little more succinct than, you know, say the second book, because you know the second book, if there's a second book, there might be a third book. So I don't know, just the way I was thinking when I was reading this book, I didn't really enjoy the end as much as I enjoyed the end of The Golden Compass, because I felt it kind of left the characters hanging a little bit. But that also kind of makes me excited for the second book in what is hopefully going to be another trilogy involving this world, and I'm really excited for that. So I'm really excited to see what happens to Malcolm and Alice. The other thing that was kind of terrifying about this was, so Gerard Bonneville, the villain, he was a pedophile. Not only was he grotesquely written and just downright evil, but he was also just a sexual deviant, and that was horrifying. There were some scenes in this book that I would caution people who have been victims of sexual assault to maybe be a little cautious while reading it, just as kind of a warning. This is a very, I was kind of at a loss as to what audience this book was for, because the contents of this book, it dealt with children, it dealt with an adventure involving children. Malcolm was, I want to say he was like between 9 and 12 years old. You know, they kind of go off on this adventure, but there were a few swear words in there. There was an F word, which I was kind of surprised about. And not that I'm here clutching my pearls about it, but I don't know that I would put it in a middle school library, which is kind of a shame, because that's where I found the first part of the trilogy. So I would kind of hope that I could find this second trilogy with it, but unfortunately I don't know that I'd recommend it for a middle schooler. Maybe I'm just a prude. I was trying to think of content adjacent books that are similar to the disturbing content in this book, and I was thinking of, like, you know, Bridge to Terabithia deals with, you know, children in impoverished situations. It deals with the death of a child, and I read that book in 5th grade. So I'm wondering if, like, the themes in this book would still be appropriate for a 13 or 14-year-old. I don't know. If you're actually like a middle school librarian, let me know, like, what you look for in a book that would be appropriate for that age group, and if the contents of this that kind of dealt with, you know, child sexual assault would be appropriate for a middle school library, because I felt like the audience is there, but I don't think that the content is quite appropriate. But again, I could just be a prude. I could be underestimating the maturity of a, you know, 12 or 13-year-old. Who knows? But that was another thing that I wasn't quite sure of and didn't really enjoy about the book, was I wasn't really sure what kind of audience it was meant for. I would probably not take this book to the beach, to be honest. It was very dark. It was more, I think, of a fall book, and I think it was really appropriate for it to come out around this time, because it would definitely make a good horror story for Halloween. If you enjoy adventure stories, but you kind of want something a little scarier, this is a good book for those, like, spooky autumn nights where you have a cup of tea and you sit down with your book and you're scared half to death. So those are my thoughts on La Belle Sauvage, and overall I really enjoyed it, and I would definitely recommend you read it. Maybe don't take it to the beach. So I don't know what I'm going to be reading for next week. If you have any recommendations, leave them in the comments, or you can get in touch with me. I am on Twitter, Instagram, Goodreads. Drop me a line, give me a suggestion, and I'll see you next week.